Today we're going to add vertical and horizontal translations to the trigonometric functions. We're going to start with the vertical translations. This specifically impacts that midpoint line, or what we're calling the axis, which is normally at y is equal to 0, and because there's going to be a shift either up or down, it's going to move that axis line up and down as well. So let's first look at the equation and identify what we know. Our parent function is the cosine function. So in the back of your head, I want you to start thinking about the fact that the cosine function starts high and ends high for one period. The number multiplied in front is our amplitude, which is our fancy name for vertical dilation. And then this plus 2 means that we're going to go and shift the entire graph up by 2. So it's going to actually change the axis from y is equal to 0. We're going to move that up by 2. So our axis is now at y is equal to 2. There's no number that's multiplied with the x, so that means that our period is still 2 pi. We identify our scale by taking the period and we divide it by 4. That's our formula. So 2 pi over 4 simplifies to be pi over 2. And in this case, I'm going to tell you that we have no phase shift, which is our horizontal shift, left or right. And that's because we have no number that is added or subtracted directly to the x. So I'm going to write none here. So I'm going to start by doing a dashed line for my axis. There's my dashed line at y is equal to 2. So that's really the center line or the mid line. And then our graph is going to go as high as 3 units above y is equal to 2. And our minimum is going to be 3 units below. So I'm actually going to do some additional dashed lines just to have an idea of where my graph should be located. So here are my dashed lines for the maximum, the highest the cosine curve is going to go, and the minimum, the lowest the cosine curve is going to go. Now I'm going to put my scale, and my scale is going by pi over 2. My scale determines where the key points are, and for a cosine curve, we start with a maximum. Then the next key point is going to be on that midpoint line, which is the axis, and then the minimum is going to be on the minimum line. And then we just follow the curve. So that is one cycle. If I was to continue, I just keep on having a key point at every distance of pi over 2, and then I'm going to connect the points together. So here is 2 cycles, and one cycle is 2 pi long. In the next question, we have a sine curve, and you'll notice that the pi over 4 is subtracted directly to the x. That means that we have a shift that is horizontal, and we identify this as a phase shift. We have a sine curve, so in my brain, I'm thinking, what does a sine curve look like? It typically starts at 0, 0, we go high, and then we go low, and then we end on the axis. The amplitude is the number that's multiplied in front of the parent function, which is an implied 1. There's nothing added or subtracted afterwards, so that means that the axis is still at y is equal to 0. There's no number that's being multiplied, no b value, in front of the parentheses, so the period is 2 pi, and the scale, we still use that formula. We take the period, we divide by 4, so 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2. The phase shift means that we are shifting the opposite direction. We see a negative, so we're actually going to the right by pi over 4. So our steps for plotting when we have a phase shift. We identify all the key features, like what we just did. Then we plot our first point, which is the point of the phase shift. I'm going to do my scale. And since I'm going to the right by pi over 4, I'm going to start my scale at pi over 4. Now, since it's a sine curve, rather than the graph starting at 0, 0 and going high, because it's been shifted to the right by pi over 4, I'm actually going to start it at pi over 4 and then I'm going to go high. I need to finish my scale before I graph the rest of this. The scale is pi over 2. Now remember that the scale is the distance between each key point. So I'm going to take pi over 4, which is really my new starting position, and I'm going to add pi over 2. So this is where I start, and this is my scale. So the next point is going to occur at 3 pi over 4. So then we take 3 pi over 4 and we add the scale again. When you take 3 pi over 4 and you add pi over 2, you get 5 pi over 4. We plot 5 pi over 4, then 5 pi over 4 plus the scale again gives you 7 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4 plus the scale again gives you 9 pi over 4. In our graph, every key point goes from the axis to the maximum, back to the axis, to the minimum, and then back to the axis. So really the only difference is the fact that we don't start at 0, 0. We start at the position based on the phase shift, which is our horizontal translation, so shifting left or right, and then we just add the scale to our beginning point to identify where those next key features are going to be. So we'll do one more together. We have a cosine graph. So in our brain, the cosine starts high and ends high. We have an amplitude of 1/2. The axis is at y is equal to 0 because there's nothing being added or subtracted at the end that makes us shift up or down. The period is 2 pi because there's no b value. The scale is pi over 2, period divided by 4. And the phase shift this time is right by pi over 2. So we're going to start by plotting the starting position, so the phase shift, which is right by pi over 2. And then we're going to add that scale. So the scale is also pi over 2. I just realized that I didn't finish all my steps above. So we're going to plot the phase shift, then we're going to add the scale to find the next key points, and then we're going to plot those key points, and then we're going to connect them. So all the things we did in the previous question, I just forgot to finish my steps. So I took my starting position at pi over 2. Now normally the graph for cosine starts high, so instead of it starting high on the y-axis, it's actually going to start high, but at pi over 2. I add pi over 2, that gives me my next key point. I add another pi over 2, that gives me the minimum, then back to the axis, and then the maximum again. And now I have my cosine curve that has been shifted to the right by pi over 2.